And Paul, why don't you say hi to everybody for a moment till we get you?
Hey, good evening, Hollis. Good evening, everybody.
Great, thank you. So now I'm going to bring us back over to just you and me and episode 14. So as we know, Reinvention Works is the destination for all things reinvention, i.e. making the next change, taking on your next destination, the journey of reinvention. And Reinvention Works webcasts from the front porch are meant to be casual conversations to inform and inspire and learn from life lessons of real people who have reinvented. What I call you is a reinventionist. So what we want to do this evening is first off, make ourselves comfortable. I hope you're dressed casually. We're on the front porch, so to speak, and we've got our nice adult beverage. This evening I poured myself a Riesling. It is a rather sweet, it's a cabinet Riesling. And I would describe the nose was kind of rubbery along with sweet, and the palate is very sweet, sort of like a pineapple kumquat taste. So it's very sweet, a little bit more sweet of a cabinet than I'm even used to drinking, but it's nice, and it's only 7.5% alcohol. So, oh, and here is what it is. It's from Germany. Don't ask me to pronounce it.
Yeah,
And how about you, Paul? What are you drinking tonight?
I went for a stronger libation this evening.
Good.
Yeah, I used to be a Scotch drinker, but then a friend of mine was out of Scotch and they served me a rye whiskey, and it's Bullet Rye. So ever since then, my bottles of Glenmorangie and Lagavulin are gathering dust, and I drink rye. And that's what I'm enjoying tonight.
So that's Bullet?
This is Bullet Rye, yes.
I haven't had Bullet Rye. I've had Bullet Bourbon.
Ah,
Love it.
they also make a rye, and it's delicious.
I haven't ever had a rye. Wow, maybe I have to try that because I just discovered Bullet Bourbon, and that was my drink do the winter, but now it's summer, so I've moved on. So why don't we do this? Why don't we prep the audience with a little bit of how housekeeping is going to flow. Just to remind everybody, this is a half-hour conversation between Paul and I, and there will be an open forum for Q&A afterwards. I ask you to hold the questions until the end. There is a Q&A icon actually that it says, you'll see it in the outer perimeter of your Zoom window. All you need to do is move your mouse to the left or to the right. It depends on what device you're on, or maybe towards the bottom, and you can type your questions in there. And after we get done with our interview and we turn the floor over for Q&A, we will just wrap up. So it's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to move fast, and Paul's going to tell us all about his secrets. Sure. Which I'm eager to hear. So why don't I turn the floor over to you, Paul, and give you your time to tell us your story.
I'll try to condense a few decades into a nutshell. I started life as a scientist. I always wanted to be a scientist. I went to graduate school. I got a doctorate degree in pharmacology and toxicology, and that's a lot of syllables for drugs and poisons. And then I went to work in industry as a toxicologist, and I pretty quickly got bored. And so I lasted in industry for 4 years, and I asked myself, do I aspire to my boss's job or my boss's boss? And the answer was a universal no. So I was doing well, but I was also sort of bored and say, do I really want to do this for a long time? And the answer was clearly no. So I took a big leap, and my first, I think, reinvention, as you call it, was to start my own company. So that was at the early age of 33, I think, 33, which was, and again, people are starting much younger than that these days. But so I left the comfort of industry to make my own payroll, my own paycheck. And I think that was a very scary time for me. But very quickly, very early on, it was a service business, and I think you understand the service business. So it didn't take me too long to recruit clients. And then, again, over 16 years, I grew that business to be a very successful operation, north of $10 million in revenues, and a lot of clients and a lot of employees. But it also, you start a business to own a business. And there's a saying, too, and that is that sometimes that business starts to own you. So I found that out after 10 or 12 years, and so I was looking to start to sell. And we're large enough to attract interest from prospective buyers. And so in 2006, someone called me up and made me the proverbial offer I couldn't refuse, and I sold the business. It was a very successful exit. It was a great time. It was before the whole financial crisis of 2008, 2009. Not that I could see that coming, of course. And then I had to say, now what do I do? And, you know, frankly, it was pretty easy for me. I hear a lot of people talk about how difficult that transition is after you've sold a business. But for me, it was easy. I had turned down so many requests to, for example, help, advise, mentor others, to serve on boards. And now I had the time to do that. And I also had the time to spend more time with my family. I still had 3 kids at home with my wife of many years. And so it was time to take a bit of time off and relax and travel. So I did a fair amount of that, but that didn't last too long because fundamentally I'm a capitalist at heart. I'm a technologist at heart. I love technology. I think a lot of people imagine that because of my biological background that my focus is exclusively in biology, but in fact, I'm much more about bringing technology to the commercial space. How do you translate what's in the laboratory for any technology into the world? And so then I became an angel investor. And I think that was my second, so I started life as a scientist, and then my reinvention, and first reinvention was as an entrepreneur. And then after choosing not to be an entrepreneur and selling my company, my next invention was to be an angel investor. And that's my principal hobby and occupation these days. And I love it. In fact, I have far more fun with it than I did running the company. So that's kind of where I'm at these days.
Excellent. So let's back up because you've mentioned how you've reinvented more than once. What's your definition of reinvention?
You know, I think all of us take a path. All of us take a journey through life. And some of us, I think, do it thinking that the path we're on is always going to be the same path. And inevitably, we come to opportunities. And I sort of use a lot of metaphors when I speak. But I think about a path, and then we come to an intersection with 4 paths leading in a different direction, and we can stay on the same path that we're on, but we might choose to say, what's over here? So I kind of think of it that way, like taking a different path, where every day and every week that the hours of my day will be spent in a different direction, that I'll be using my mind in different ways, that I'll be interacting with people and the world of technology in different ways. So that's what I consider to be a reinvention.
So it almost sounds like the academic in you, the scholar in you, is always intrigued by learning, and that's kind of what propelled you in all these different ways.
Absolutely. And in fact, I think when I get bored, then I know that I could, for example, with my first job, I was very well paid. I was at the peak of what I could do from an academic standpoint or from a scientific standpoint, but I got bored because you're right, I wasn't learning anymore. And for me, an important philosophy is to always be learning. So, even in my 50s, in 60s and 70s, until the day I die, I want to always be learning. It's fun for me. I still aspire. My perennial New Year's resolution is to learn Spanish, and I'm still, it's on my list for the 3rd year, but I always want to learn, and I want to learn to play the ukulele. So, whatever it is, and so it's not just in business, but I enjoy learning about business. There was a lot as a scientist that I did not know about business.
Right.
So I had to learn, and I did.
And that was actually a great segue, because that was going to be my next question. You went from being a scientist, a board scientist, and a board well-paid scientist, but yet you felt that the next transition was to own your own business. And why your own business as opposed to just moving out of the job that you were in where you were bored and maybe into some other kind of job?
I thought I wanted to be my own boss. I saw a great opportunity. There was a particular need in the market that no one was filling. It was a pain point, as we like to say. There were business customers who wanted to buy, and I knew the technology, and I thought I could take this out of the laboratory and put it into a commercial offering, and that's what I did. So I was excited, and I think I'm a bit of a risk taker. I've discovered that about myself over the years. I don't mind taking a leap, and for me, in a way, though, it wasn't too much of a risk. When I started my business, the academic career in my specialty was in such demand that I knew that even if I failed, I'd still be able to find gainful employment very quickly somewhere else. So in a way, that was a bit of a backstop for me. But yeah, to come back to your original question or comment, I always enjoy learning, and that's true even becoming an angel investor. That's a whole separate art and science that I've taken the time to learn about.
Yeah, so you're just really good at teeing these up for me. So, in terms of the risk tolerance, and that you said you learned that about yourself. So, do you also think that your tolerance for risk has increased over the years and over this cycle of reinvention? Like, is there a correlation between successfully reinventing and risk tolerance, do you think?
I think so. And I think that, what enables one to tolerate more risk is to make informed risks. So there's a difference between a reckless risk of going blindly, jumping off a cliff and hoping that it's going to work out, which it rarely does. And then what I call the calculated or informed risk, where you really have a pretty reasonable crystal ball, some idea, and where you can also mitigate the absolute risk by spreading risk out in many different ways. So for example, with my angel investing, I don't put all of my money into a single company. I have a portfolio of 25 to 30 different businesses. I know some of those investments will fail, but I also expect that a fair number will be big hits. Mm-hmm. So that's sort of the risk tolerance that I'm okay with.
Right. And it's kind of funny that you mentioned wanting to play the ukulele, because last week's guest said the same thing. So tell me, what is it about the ukulele?
I think I've heard people play it. I've gone to people like Jake Shimabukura's concerts before, and I just think it's a fantastic instrument. And I'm also looking for something that's reasonably portable. I sling a big guitar. I guess I could try the harmonica. But I just like the way that instrument sounds, and it appeals. And I think it's a bit easier to play than many other stringed instruments. And with these fingers, I need something pretty.
The reason I ask is because her reason for wanting to play the ukulele, and also she said that she took hula hoop lessons, was because she was trying to identify with that same sense of wonderment that you have as a child, like boundless limitations. And that's why I asked. I wondered if there was a connection there as well.
Sure.
So when it came to your first reinvention, and maybe your subsequent ones, I mean, you hadn't been an angel investor before either. What did you do when you recognized that you didn't have certain skills that you would need in order to succeed at those reinventions?
That was pretty easy. I think one of the things that I found pretty quickly is that I have a very strong ego. I know what I know, but I also know what I don't. And there's a lot I don't know. In fact, there's a huge, vast library of things that I don't understand.
How to speak Spanish.
It's how to speak Spanish. That's right. I can fake it, but I don't really speak it. So, in fact, when I started my business, I landed in one of the business incubators, one of the early incubators in town. And I didn't have any choice. They said, if you're going to be in this incubator, you're going to have to be supported by mentors and advisors. I said, great. And so, in fact, some of the same people that I worked with, I still work with. In fact, I serve on boards with some of them. And this goes back for more than 20 years now. So as soon as I got introduced to some of these mentors, I took advantage of all that they had to offer in terms of financial advice, go-to-market advice, branding advice, all the things that I was not skillful at whatsoever. And these were the days that, by the way, predated the internet. This was back in the dark ages. Okay, this was back in the early 1990s. So, and since then, when I went into angel investing, I was invited to be an angel investor by a friend of mine, and I found great strength in the knowledge of the group of angel investors. I learned from fellow angels who were far more sophisticated than me.
So, perhaps you've had a lot of a combination of good luck, good, opportunity knocking, and good fortune, like being placed in an incubator where you had mentors not just available to you, but forced upon you.
Right.
What would you tell people who haven't had sort of all of these sequence of, right in front of them kind of opportunities? What would you advise on how they would go out and seek it or find it, especially if it's not something that they're comfortable with, i.e. they're not comfortable yet in their confidence and their ego and their capabilities, but they know that they want to change?
So they want to change. And, I would say there was no luck in me going into an incubator. And just to correct the phrase, I wasn't placed there. I applied for it. It's something I really wanted to do. And back then, I joined an incubator in Maryland in 1991. At that time, there were only two. And now they're all over. And so, in fact, I think it's far easier now than ever before to find, if you're looking and considering making a leap, if you're considering reinventing yourself, to find that kind of support system. And in fact, the incubators now also have very simple models. You don't have to pay rent. You don't have to do something like that. You can go in, and for many incubators have a program where you can be what's called an affiliate. For a small amount of money per month, you can take advantage of the peer network there. You can talk to others and ask them what's their story. You can meet with mentors. You can attend events. You can watch people pitch their ideas so you can get an idea, is this something that makes sense for you? So there's a much better support ecosystem today than there ever was in the past.
Yeah, I mean, even the notion that you knew of an incubator, I don't know how that came about. But I would venture to say that there are people scratching their head out there going, what's an incubator?
Really? Okay, so business incubators. So you think about a business incubator, and sometimes businesses sort of chafe at the idea. They want to think of themselves as big and grown up, but an incubator is the idea of it's something that helps to support and nurture and help to get going a very early hatchling of a business, as it were. And there are incubators in just about every state. I'd be surprised if there's a single state, in the entire United States that doesn't have one or more incubators, business incubators. And some are very specific, but some are generic, like come and bring your business here. And I think if wherever your guests are this evening, if they, Google their state and business incubator, I suspect they'll find one.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
So, you mentioned earlier that you when you first went out on your own and left your job, that, it was scary. And thinking back to that journey from the time that you left your job and started until you sold it, which I would imagine was probably the scariest time. What was that spectrum of emotion when the business started owning you or whatever, but especially in the early times, because that's what I think the audience will relate to.
I think even though we had a service business, which meant that we could generate revenues very quickly, we didn't generate profits all that quickly. And which meant that I, as the business owner, if I wanted to hire people, really couldn't pay myself much of anything. And I mean, it was a very pauperish existence for 3 years, I would say the first 3 years, which isn't so bad in hindsight. And I borrowed money from family members to help, and I took what life savings I had, which was not much, to get things going. And we operated on a shoestring, and the business incubator helped us to do that because the space was inexpensive. We didn't pay much in rent. And those were fun, and those were exciting, and those were crazy days, and those were many sleepless nights. Terrifying, when I was worried that we didn't have the cash to pay payroll. That was always the thing I feared the most. But I'm proud to say that in the 16 years I ran the business, we met payroll every time, but sometimes it came close. And then in year 3, we started to generate enough revenue that we turned a profit, and I could start to pay myself and really start to reinvest much more back into the business.
And you mentioned that you had these mentors that helped you early on. Did you consult or get support or kind of the push that you needed to leave your job, and when you first left your job before you got into the incubator program, or what was your additional support and where did it come from?
I got no support at all from my employer to leave my job. In fact, I was the only toxicologist there, and they begged me to stay. In fact, they said, you can stay here, you can start your own company and just work for us half-time, we'll pay full benefits. But for reasons of potential conflict of interest, I had to make a full separation. And the greatest support for me, this was before I had any mentors at all, the greatest support was my wife. She was my support and this is a key thing for anyone who's going to go out on their own. You have to have support of, with the significant people in your life, especially your spouse. And she was a great support. And I was vacillating back and forth. Am I crazy? Why should I do this? I've got this great job. I have this respect that, and she said, look, you don't want to play the game of woulda, shoulda, coulda. Just do it. Just do it. She was the one who gave me the kick to push me and say, just do it. So I give her all the credit for that.
Excellent. And I'm sure she's happy she did.
She's happy she did.
And how about any specific resources or tools or guides, books? Where did you absorb it all?
On a continuing basis. We talked earlier about sort of continuous learning and always be learning. And I will tell you, I was in Dallas, Texas at the time when I was employed. And so but knowing not much about business, I took an introduction to entrepreneurship course for a semester in the evenings, 3 evenings a week at Southern Methodist University. And it was very, very helpful. It gave me basic introduction to reading financial pro formas and spreadsheets and planning and all the things that I really had not much experience with before. So that was not enough, but it helped. It was enough to get me launched. And then every step of the way, I joined locally a business roundtable, a roundtable of CEOs, not in my industry, just non-competitive CEOs. And we would meet once a month, and that was a fantastic resource where I could hear their stories and they could hear mine, and they could offer open and honest support and critique of what I was doing. So that kind of a roundtable was super helpful. And then people would always recommend books, like Get Your Ship, or The E-Myth, which is a classic one about, it says why most small businesses fail and what you can do about it. I mean, there's a great group of books that provide great lessons learned. And I was always trading ideas about that with fellow entrepreneurs.
And of course, in this day and age, we have video.
We do. We do.
So what has been the most rewarding part about your reinvention process?
I think the learning. A lot of people would say it's the wealth creation. I think it's several things, Hollis, now that I think about it. One would be the fact that within my own company, we were actually able to make a difference. I think people start companies for different reasons. Some people start companies to have the independence. Some people start companies to achieve wealth. Some people start companies because they're just passionate about something. And I think I did it both for the independent. I think I did it for all three reasons, honestly. And I think what excites me the most of that, though, is that we were actually able to make some game-changing and innovative technology that really does change the way that everything is done these days with respect to drug development. I won't bore you with the details because it's very technical, but it was important and it was significant and it moved the ball forward, and I'm very proud of that.
Awesome. And how about what was the most challenging part of the process?
I think it was people. I think that when you start a business, I met a far more seasoned CEO once, and he said, "Paul, welcome to the world of business." He said, "By the way, it's not, and this may not be appropriate. I was going to say," he said, "it's not personnel, it's personnel." And I said, "What do you mean by that?" He said, "You have warring people, you have people who don't want to behave, and you find yourself mired in that. And the sooner you can hire a good HR person, the better." And I discovered that was true. I think it's the far easier challenge in a technology company. Excuse me, let me silence that. Is building technology. The harder part is to find a great team of people and then to manage them effectively. And that's something that no PhD will prepare you for.
Right. And it's probably unavoidable because it seems to be, I'm sure in your CEO roundtables, a chronic problem no matter what industry you're in.
That's right. Exactly right. So I think people was probably the biggest challenge. I think there were more mundane challenges at times, like just cash management when when it costs you a lot of money just to turn on the lights every day, when you've got a staff of 80 plus, you're budgeting cash flow. But I think all growing businesses have that issue, and probably the people issue as well.
Right. And how about any failures, or it doesn't have to be business failures per se, but what did you attempt that you thought was going to fly and just didn't, and how did you bounce back?
Boy, I can think of any number of times when we attempted to satisfy a customer, or when maybe we went too far to satisfy a customer and didn't, where we didn't deliver successfully. And I had to be the one, because when they say the buck stops at your desk, it really does. And when you screw up on a big project with a big customer, you can't ask a study director to call that customer. You've got to do it because they're putting their trust in you. And I think all business owners can understand that. So there were any number of times, and that's where I learned the art of the quick and sincere apology. Mm-hmm. So I did that any number of times, and glad to say that I think I retained all of those customers. We made good by them.
Actually, I really like that point, the art of the sincere apology. That hasn't necessarily come up. And I think it's relevant because, you also have to apologize to yourself especially if you're, probably the person who's going to be the most critical about your reinvention process is yourself.
Yeah.
And then you have to forgive yourself for those mistakes too.
I think another failure, and I will tell you early on, and it comes back to managing people, was really learning how to, the art both of hiring people, but also firing people. And initially I made the mistake that many people do. I was quick to hire and slow to fire. It took me a long time. And there was someone I probably should have fired for a couple of years. And when I finally did, I learned the lesson of how important it is to fire people who are not right for your organization. And I never made that mistake again, and that was a critical one. And thereafter, I was slow to hire and much quicker to fire.
Well, I mean, I think that's especially for anybody listening who might be interested in the entrepreneurship, business ownership route. I got a good piece of advice, which was the first time that you think about firing somebody is usually the best time to do it.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
So how about like some specific takeaways? If we were to say, what can people put into play tomorrow to help them move on their reinvention journey? What would those 3 things be?
I think write down, put on paper a really, start off with an inventory of what you're really good at. What do you think you're really good at? And then ask some people who you trust, friends, family members, anybody, what do they think you're best at? Because you may get a different list. And then look at that and also do an honest assessment about risk tolerance. Are you okay with failure? Because I have failed any number of times in my efforts in different reinventions. And you have to be okay with failure. Failure to me is a great teacher, but a lot of people are not okay with significant failure. So I think you need to say, but what if this happens? Are you going to be okay if things go south and they don't go the way you expect? And then I think you need to talk to the other people in your family and say, what's the opportunity? And really start to plan. And if you're thinking about a reinvention, you got to have a plan. And plans always change, as they say, but you got to start somewhere. So start to put pen to paper or keyboard to Word document or whatever you want to do, and start to outline, what is it that you think you want to do? What does it look like? How does it work? Is it something you're going to do solo, or are you going to do this with a team of people? Do you already have other partners identified to help you make this happen? So those are the ways I would start.
Do you have any advice about sort of if you don't have partners, but you are recognizing that, you don't want to go it alone, or you don't have all the capabilities to do it alone and you want to assemble a team? Any advice there?
Yeah, I would say find technology, well, and again, it doesn't have to be technology, but find places where like-minded people gather. So maybe you want to start an artisanal bakery. Maybe you want to start a brewery. Maybe you want to do something that's not tech heavy. But no matter what it is, there will be gatherings of people who are like you. And again, I tend to focus on technology because that's what I invest in and my focus is. So I will go to many technology events where I'll find many other people who they're already entrepreneurs, or they're service providers, or they're people looking for technology partners, or they're investors, or people looking for. So you find places where people are looking for other people, looking for opportunities, and get yourself in the middle of that.
Great. I want to ask you one last question, then I'm going to turn it over to the Q&A. Okay. And that is, do you feel that reinvention is for everybody?
No, I think if you're really, I think first, if you're watching this program, you're considering reinvention. But I think clearly not. I think there are some people who just love what they're doing. And I would say the grass isn't always greener somewhere else, right? To toss in another metaphor, it really isn't. I think too often people, look at a good situation and say, oh, but maybe there's better when maybe there really isn't. They take what is good for granted. So I think make that real assessment and ask yourself, why do you want to reinvent? Is it because you're unhappy, or is it because maybe things are good and you think there's something better? What's your real underlying motivation?
Great. Well, I already see a question popping up, so I'm going to go there. Okay. What do you look for when investing in a company?
That's a great question. And first and foremost, we look for who's running the show. We bet on the jockey, not the horse, like we like to say. And if we don't like the CEO, we don't like his or her teammates, We don't care if someone has got an invention that turns, you know, dirt into gold. We're not going to invest in that. So first and foremost, we look at the team. Second, we look at what is the value proposition. That could be a product or a service. Third, we look at what is the market, what's the pain point, is it a $10 million market or a $10 billion market? And the last thing we look at is the thing that I mentioned earlier, is what's the plan, how are you going to do it?
Great. It's very succinct. You've been through this before.
I think so.
We had some, here's another question. You said you weren't able to pay yourself for 3 years. How do you know when to continue the fight or give up? It's a great question.
Boy, I don't know, because I've seen fellow entrepreneurs who I think should have given up long ago, and who didn't do it for 3 years but did it for 10, and were not willing to have an honest conversation. And I think their family suffered for it, and I think they suffered for it. So I think kind of up front, you've got to sign a contract with yourself and with your significant others, if you have them, and say, here's how much time I'm willing to put in. Here's how much I'm willing to invest. And if we're not here at this point in time, I'm going to go find a job.
Yeah, I think that's really wise. Okay, and here's another question that was submitted earlier. Do you think you're done reinventing? What haven't you yet accomplished that scares you that you'd still like to do? And I guess I can't be speaking Spanish.
We're playing the ukulele. Let's think about that. You know, I do a lot of things. I do some volunteer work, so I do some board service on some of the companies in which I invest, but I also do some nonprofit work. I do some fun things too. So my most fun volunteer gig is I'm an avid scuba diver, and so I'm a volunteer diver at the National Aquarium in Baltimore. So, you know, every other Thursday you can come and wave at me across the glass while I feed fish underwater, right? So that's fun. But that doesn't. So that's, you know, that's a reinvention of sorts, right? Me and neoprene in the water. So that's and I think always about that. I mean, I started skiing 12 years ago in my 40s. I'd never skied before, and now I love that. So I like that. You know, I think I'm reinventing myself also as a bit of a world traveler. Maybe people think that that's not much, but I have this insatiable curiosity to understand how everyone else on the planet lives, and not just to Europe, but everywhere. In fact, if you see this guy in back of me, that's a big jade general that we had shipped back from Xi'an when my wife and I were in China. And we had no idea how heavy that would be, and we discovered it when
the shipping bill came in.
Yeah, when the shipping, and actually the movers trying to get into the house, yes. So, but you know, I think the one thing I'm actually toying with, Hollis, honestly, is I think that there's not enough exposure of kids in high school to science and all the opportunities, not just to science theoretically in texts, but to understand what is it that scientists really do. What is it that scientists do? So I've actually been toying with the idea of starting a nonprofit, which would bring scientists and engineers and technologists from the local community into schools to speak with students, so that they can say, it's one thing to watch something on TV about some scientist who works at NASA or somewhere else, but it'd be neat to see scientists in a student's own community, and to have students appreciate what the real opportunities are. I don't think there's enough of that.
Yeah, I just heard about the spaghetti bridge. Did you hear this? This is like, actually, I think Johns Hopkins is involved in this, and there are students that come in, engineering students, high school engineering interested students, and they have to build a bridge out of spaghetti pasta, and it has to bear weight.
Right.
And how it breaks is an indication of how well it was built. It's really, and I think it's fun for the kids, you know.
Sure.
So spaghetti and glue.
Very cool.
And then one more question. Are startups just for young whippersnappers? What's the oldest age of a founder of a company you've invested in?
No, startups are not for young whippersnappers. And in fact, I will tell you that we recently, the investment group that I work mostly with is called Blue Venture Investors. We led an investment round in a medical device company within the past 12 months. I ran point on that investment. And the CEO and CFO, who are the founders, are both in their 60s. So they bought out an existing business maybe 10 years ago when they were in their 50s, and are still running it into their 60s. So absolutely not just for young whippersnappers at all.
I think that's probably very encouraging for some folks out there.
Just look at Colonel Sanders. I mean, look at his story, right? I mean, he was, I don't know how old he was when he figured out the formula for Kentucky Fried Chicken. He was not a young whippersnapper,
I think he was 73. I
Right.
think recently, I think he's the oldest, like, successful entrepreneur on record.
And he'd had many failings before that too. So he never gave up. I'm a huge fan of that story.
That's excellent. Well, everybody, I am going to now take us over to screen share so you can see what we've got coming up next week. First of all, this is how you can get a hold of Paul. He's generously given his email if you want to reach out to him for additional questions, psilber@gmail.com. I want to remind you all that you can find out about our upcoming webcasts anytime at reinventionworks.com/webcast. We are on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is reinventionwork. That's singular because Twitter limits us to 16 characters. We're also interested in sponsors for this program, our email and our tweet chat, if you know anybody there. Next week's guest is Mike Robert. He's the Director of Marketing for a B2B company, and he's walked an interesting life path. He was a bank loan officer. Then he left that job at the peak of the market to start his own music studio and give musical instruction because that was his passion, his lifelong dream. And then the economy caught up with him, and now he's reinvented himself as a marketing director. So we're going to hear his story next Wednesday, 8:30 p.m. Standard Time, always. And tell your friends about our program. And if you are on social media, it is #Reinvention Works. That's with the plural. So Paul, thank you so very much for your time. I really do appreciate it. And everybody who's joined us this evening, I thank you as well. And I hope you have a great night and we see you again very soon. Take care now.